Let me know when you're ready to start.
Okay. Hans, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So it's great everyone came. Thank you for showing up. It's great that Michelle is going to share insight and knowledge with us. And it's fantastic. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you, Jim, for kind of initiating, Jim Lively, that is. And, you know, at Groundwork, we are just committed to learning and expanding our understanding of cultures and our role in this world. And it's part of an equity initiative that I've tried to keep everyone tuned into. Some of the partners from other organizations have kind of heard updates from me from time to time. So as we go, we're just interested in sharing our journey with other people. So I'm glad that some of the folks who are not Groundwork staff, advisory council, or board have shown up. So that's beautiful. Thanks for being a part of this. And, you know, we'll keep rolling and keep everybody connected. And I'll just pass it over to Michelle to open this up.
Bonjour Kinawia, Zawajinka Quenin, Mong Dodem, Gize Dodem, Mani Wanakaning, Mage Mishkwa Jibikong, in Donjaba, Sutton's Bay and Dida, Mage Maple City. I'm really happy that you're all here, and I'm just going to present this as if I would present it to anyone else. I know we're a little less formal, so I do want to leave a lot of time for questions and answers and all those kinds of things. You know, in doing these kind of presentations, you could spend semesters learning this information, or, you know, so to condense things into an hour's time, I just want to set the intention for today that this is going to be a survey of the Anishinaabe people or Native American people. We'll go into a little bit of history. We'll go into a little bit of culture. And I sent out some things which I know were forwarded to everybody, you know, that just are real specific to, you know, cultural competencies in working with Native Americans. There's some of the things that, you know, if I'm doing bigger formal presentations, those are usually handouts that I have available to people that you can print and download for free and learn a little bit more. Sometimes it could be a guide to, you know, come up with more questions that you may want to ask. So I sent those, you know, not too far in advance, but enough that you can look at them. And, you know, being that we all are on the same threads and, you know, doing the same work, feel free to like call or, you know, email me with other questions that you might have, or if you want to set up a one-on-one call and, you know, talk about things, then we're good. So as part of our intention, because some of the things that we're talking about are not fun, they're very uncomfortable, and even doing some of the presentation when I'm thinking in, you know, the historical context of things can be rough to even feel. I just want to set our intention with Smudge, which is how I would do things, just to kind of clear the air. This is a virtual smudge, and I'm using cedar to burn because a lot of times when we're working in groups, when we smudge a room, we're cleaning out the air, we're providing some aromatherapy for people to breathe, and just everybody kind of align their hearts, their thinking, their, you know, not just your hearts, but your heartbeat and being present in the moment. So cedar is a grandmother plant. It's, you know, she is one of those trees that stays awake all year round. She picks up all kinds of medicine, lived in a swamp. There's a whole number of stories behind her. But cedar is that soft, gentle medicine. So when we burn it and we breathe in together that essence and breathe out, it just kind of settles and grounds us. So, you know, think consciously right now about breathing in a deep breath of fresh air, you know, gathering up all of those questions, all of those concerns, all those preconceived ideas in that breath, and then breathing that out, letting it out to the universe. Because with this intention, I'm setting aside my own personal self and going to let spirit speak through. You know, like all of this that I'm going to share with you is not my own. It's things that I've learned either from elders or family or at school or whatever, you know, and some of it is my experiences, but none of it belongs to me. One of the things, my Nishnabe name is Ozawajinkakwe, which is a literal translation is yellow pine woman. However, in the community where my family is from, that's the Tree of Life. And the Tree of Life was one of the first teachers. So when I was younger, I never wanted to be a teacher. I hated school. I didn't like the way I was treated. I was a transient student because we moved all the time. And so I just thought I will never be one of those. But once I got to college, it seemed like every job I was doing, I was in some form or fashion of teaching and, teaching swimming, coaching, all these different things. And so I just finally stopped fighting it and realized that that's just the essence, but I don't have to do it the way anybody else does it. So, so when I finally accepted who I was and what my role was supposed to be, then life got a little bit easier. So I'm just here to present and share what I know. It's, it's what's worked for me and what I understand, and it's always changing. So, they say that true wisdom comes when you are in the now and you let go of any control or any thought or idea. Nature is constantly changing. So, people are individual and complex and have their own purpose, their own personality. So we'll just set our intention there and just be open for whatever. And please don't feel bad about asking questions or feel like you can't ask questions. Don't feel uncomfortable. I have no judgment, and hopefully now that we've set our intention, nobody else will either. So with that, are we ready? All right. And I am going to share my screen. I have a couple of videos to add in here. They're very short. I know we only have an hour, but I think this one, I don't know how this Zoom will work. If it doesn't have sound, that's okay, because I turned on the captions. So if I can move my controls here, we'll get us started. Can you hear the sound? Thumbs up? Okay.
I'm Apache, but really that's the government's name, because they can't say Jessica and there.
They will tell me how awesome they think it is that I've decided to be a part of my culture. And it's funny to me, it like hits me really weird and I don't like it. And I didn't know why at first, but it's because I haven't decided to be a part of my culture. I live it every day.
I'm more comfortable with the term Native, divorced from Native American. I know there are people who use Indigenous, and if there is one term I do not like to be called, is American Indian.
And for me, to be Indigenous is to have an intimate and interconnected relationship to a homeland.
And so that's really important, because land is, tied to every aspect of who we are.
Being Native in a city is almost a daily reminder of your people's erasure, of the fact that people don't even remember that you're here and that you exist.
But what I did encounter was just this preconceived notion that all Native Americans are dead.
I've had older white men come up to me and say, "Oh man, if this was 40 years ago, I can just do whatever I wanted to you."
The cattle outside doing the work and the dog inside the house, those are property. Those are the Black folks in America. They're our property to white men. Then the exotic antelope on the wall, or the exotic, that's the native, that's how natives are perceived in America.
We're treated like animals. They monitor our blood quantum. We're the only, besides dogs and horses, I don't know of any other animal that they monitor the blood quantum.
The way I explain it to people is like, imagine a pizza with different slices, and let's say 32 slices. Of the 32 slices, I'm 28 Apache. That's my particular blood quantum. And Native Americans in the US are the only minority group who have to prove their nativeness on an Indian card.
It's used to divide Native people against each other, because it can be used as a way to say, I am more Native than you. And I was a part of that too. I used my 4/4 to kind of make myself feel better against other people.
The one drop rule, meaning that, one drop of Black blood makes you Black. That was to keep as many people oppressed or, legitimize their oppression as possible. But on the other side, one drop of anything else completely dilutes you as a Native person. So if you're a Native person, you have the one drop of something else, then suddenly you're less Native. So it's the opposite.
Traditionally, within Apache society, you go by the mother. And if the mother's recognized as Apache, she has her clan, the children are unquestionably Apache. Not in the American context, not when patriarchy trumps matriarchy. So what does that mean? My sisters are short 1/16 of a degree. What does that mean? Does that mean their pinkies aren't Apache? What does that mean?
You know, being a mixed race person is a whole nother side of it, but that's a very common experience in our tribe. So it's not as if we're unusual in that way. What is unusual is the admixture of Black.
My grandfather actually doesn't want people, if he hears that somebody from the tribe is coming over, he won't come out of his room because he doesn't want them to know that he's that complexion. I guess he doesn't want me to be affiliated with having African-American blood, but I mean, I say it. It's not going to change anything.
If it were up to the American government, Natives wouldn't be around because after a certain time, that blood will dilute. It will go out. And so if there's no Native peoples to provide benefits, then we're not obligated to meet these treaty rights. And if we're not obligated to meet these treaty contracts, then the land is available. The resources are available.
And I think that essential point about our claim to sovereignty, our claim to land, our claim to a culture, our claim to resources is one that gets lost if we don't insist upon the fact that we are nations.
And we have taken huge steps to decolonizing, and that proof comes from people being able to have the opportunities to speak their language, to be on their ancestral land.
But the thing with decolonization is that it's an ongoing process, just like grieving, just like any loss.
As much as possible now, I try to tell people that I have a Native American name, and maybe it doesn't mean anything to you, but it means everything to me. My name maybe doesn't have a romanticized Hollywood Indian name, but my name has more meaning than that. My name means that my family survived. My family survived disease. My family survived Catholicism. My family survived settler colonialism, and my family, they survived. I survived. My existence is resistance. Me saying my name is Skiam Tulks, that is resistance in and of itself.
Let me get out of this. So I'm opening with that to kind of, I mean, because that just opens up so many different directions that we can talk in. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they need to say before we move on from here? Okay. So we'll.
It's kind of like preliminary.
Oh, sorry. Was that a question? Or was that my screen? Okay. All right, so this is a cultural competence presentation that our agency does often with folks from different agencies, especially non-Native agencies that we work with the state and things like that. So I'm just gonna give you a brief overview. I'll try not to get too much into all of the heavy history because that can be very overwhelming and we'd need much more time. But just as an introduction, here in Michigan, as many of you know, the Anishinaabe people are made up of the Three Fire Society. That's the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. We are not, you know, historically, if we go way back in history, you know, more than 1,000 years, we were not the original occupants here in the Great Lakes area. We started on the East Coast and made our way because of prophecies to the Great Lakes region. So we had a number of spiritual wisdom keepers that had visions about this other race of people coming to the East Coast, and that if we stayed there, we would get wiped out. So over, 500 to 1,000 years, our people left the East Coast and had to kind of move through Iroquois territory. And at the time we finally made it to the Great Lakes area, the Lakota were here. And so we kind of had to push them out too. So it wasn't without skirmish or our own little historical wars and battles and negotiations. But so for the last, and I don't know the time frames. I've heard different ones where it's been like 1,500 years, it's been a couple thousand, it's been 1,000 years that we've been here in this area. It could be a little bit more as archaeology kind of uncovers more and more history, and they find out artifacts and burials and things related to the Anishinaabe people. We find that history could be more than a couple thousand years. But other tribes that were in this area, we also had the Sauk and the Fox and the Menominee, and there were many other tribes that we've developed new relationships with. So the Great Lakes area represented our new home. And so as we settled into this area and as we traveled, the three tribes, the Three Fire Society, each one took a different role in maintaining who we were as a people and protecting each other. And so part of doing that, we kind of divided important aspects of our culture and our identity. So a lot of our oral history and our oral history was shared by all, but certain aspects of our history and certain aspects of our medicinal ways were kept by the Ojibwe people. And we still see those teachings in our Medewan society, which is a medicine society that they're the keepers of these old birch bark scrolls. If you read the Mishomis book, which is a resource that I'll provide for you at the end, I know, Jim, you have a copy of it. You'll get like a brief crash course and just a brief introduction to some of that history. And then the Odawa people, which when you translate that into English, that means the traders. So there are people of commerce. They're the ones who would develop the relationships with other tribes as we were moving through an area. They would be the ones that would go out and find things that they'd be able to trade and really set up an economy for our people as we were moving and traveling. And then the Potawatomi people were the keepers of the fire. So one of the original stories is, there was this fire that was lit when our people decided to leave the East Coast. I mean, we had other tribal relations and families that we were close to. And so the Potawatomi are the keepers of this fire, this original sacred fire that has to keep going. And each place that we migrated to, that we moved to and lived for a time, a fire was lit and some of the people stayed. And that fire represents the spirit inside of all of us that connects every living being, but it also represents where we've been. And so you always have a home to go to, even if you're not in your house or on your originally designated land, you still have a home to when you see those fires lit. So those are the friendly people, the friendly fires, so to speak, where, there's somebody, you can always go home to. And so, there's a lot more teachings with that. And that original sacred fire still burns. And there are different wisdom keepers in the Potawatomi community that keep that fire going. I think right now it's out in Kansas, but I know that it travels around from person to person who takes on that responsibility. In our original culture, what you're seeing here represents so much within our culture. We had 7 original clans for the Anishinaabe people, and more have been developed because of that. For the Ojibwe people, we are a patriarchal system, so your clan is passed down through your father. However, with the Odawa with the Odawa, they were typically a matriarchal society, so the clan was passed down through the woman, and some of that goes back and forth.
Michelle, I hate to interrupt you. Are you intending to be moving through your slides right now? Because for us, we can't see what you're showing.
Can you see that big symbol?
No, we're stuck on the first slide of your presentation.
Are you? That's interesting. Let me see. Oh, sharing has been paused. Okay, thanks for telling me that.
No problem.
Let me exit out of this real quick. All right. share a different, okay, now it's, can you see it now?
Yes, now we can see it. Thank you.
Yeah, let's just, so I thought I was play from current slide. So if I go like this, can you still see it? Hold on. Does it disappear?
No, we can still see kind of the setup and not the full screen version.
Okay, that's weird. Okay, we'll just do it this way.
It just flashed for a second and then it switched back.
Oh, okay, let's try this.
Slideshow might do it.
I had it on slideshow, that's why I was surprised. Sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front. No.
Where does your almond milk?
That doesn't do that. It says bring it to the front. Let me see how we share that. Move to the bottom. Resume share. How's that?
That's better.
Got it? Can you see that circle?
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it. We're just seeing your notes too, Michelle, just so you know.
Oh, okay. I don't think that's too big of a deal. Let's see.
Oh, that's better.
Perfect.
How's that?
Got it.
Okay. All right. So you see our clans. The words that are there are the 7 grandfather teachings. So those are our moral code, our spiritual code that, you know, kind of helps keep people, you know, working together and, you know, being humane to each other. And it's also how we present ourselves to the rest of the world as well. And then you have the 4 cardinal directions with the 4 races of man. And that's a whole story in itself. You know, the 4 races of man. In our origin stories, we believe that there were 4 races of man that were originally created and that they were put down in the different directions of the earth. So each in a certain space of the earth, and each was given a responsibility, one of the elements of the earth to be responsible for and keep balance. And even though we may not see each other, we may not have had relations early on in history, according to archaeologists and historians, we still had a role and a responsibility, and we had an awareness of other people living in other places, maintaining that role. So in the yellow quadrant, and I would probably turn this wheel a little bit, the yellow quadrant were the people that were placed in the eastern direction. And we see that in a lot of Asian cultures when we see like acupuncture, how, you know, you're opening up the skin and allowing the air to come through, Tai Chi and their medicinal practices and things like that. The southern direction was the people that were placed here in this area, in this region of the world, and they were given the responsibility of the earth. And so we still see that in a lot of our herbal medicinals, our attachment to land and the fights that we have there. The western direction, of course, is, you know, Africa and Egypt and all those places. They were given the responsibility of the water. And, you know, the first time I learned this and I was thinking about Africa, I'm like, that primarily is desert. Why would it be water? But when you think about, you know, our bodies being primarily made up of water, and we think about the fact that you need water to survive, if you only have a little bit, you better know how to be resourceful with it, how to find it, and how to take care of it. And so, and then when you look at medicinal ways, you know, a lot of the traditional practices, there are some tribes that will put certain things in water, and then they'll use water as a healing practice or a spiritual practice. And it was a Black man who discovered plasma, which is the water substance in our blood too. So I mean, all of this is ingrained, but probably subconscious for many of us anymore. In the northern direction, of course, we have the white folks, the Caucasian, who were given the responsibility of fire. And we think about electricity. We think about our, you know, medicinal practices, using chemical reactions to create pharmaceuticals, or using electricity to develop these machines that help, you know, people survive and help us in our medicinal ways. So, you know, all of these are needed. All of them have practical means. All of them are important. None is better than any other. But the teaching from the creator at that time was, if any one of these people or these elements gets out of balance, it's going to hurt others, and it's going to throw the whole world off. And we're all part of nature. So letting go of, you know, greed and lust and control over our own affairs and being part of nature was really one of those original teachings that many cultures had. All races of man have had some type of earth culture at one time. So that's kind of the crash course there. This is a map of all of the federally recognized tribes in Michigan. Some of you probably are aware of this already, but just so you can kind of see how, where the tribes have been interspersed. This is the agency that I work for, Intertribal Council Michigan. We're in Sault Ste. Marie. So we're kind of in a hub, not far from many of the tribes. We were placed here. Our origins come from 3 tribes, Bay Mills, Grand Traverse Band, and I think Keweenaw Bay were such small communities, and during the civil rights era, they needed to kind of work together to have a bigger voice to pull in resources that they needed. So that's how Intertribal Council was formed. And we are a consortium of all the federally recognized tribes in the state. And so their tribal chairmen make up our board of directors, and they kind of direct us. This is what we need. This is what we're working on. Bring these resources or help us write grants, manage funds, whatever is needed, we kind of provide that. They don't answer to us, we answer to them. So let's jump into a little bit of history here. So the history of Native folks to, where we're at right now is a story of first conquest, treaties, assimilation, reorganization, termination, and then self-determination. When we think about conquest, the first people to colonize or to come to the States, they were there for their own interests. We know that part of the history, so we don't have to go into it, but it's of a mindset for, founding and the expansion of English colonies. That was the first purpose of people coming to this continent. The era of treaties, treaties are formal agreements. Some, they're between 2 sovereign nations. So both the colonial settlers and the United States governments used treaties with Native people to solemnize agreements, usually related to the land and the territory usage. Assimilation was then, after the treaty era, assimilation then was the policy used by the US. And it's a process in which people or a group of people adopt the culture, language, and customs of another group of people. Assimilation was a key strategy for the US government, not just in hopes that Native people would adopt, but it was forced assimilation. And that, we see that through, government-run boarding schools, forced removal, we talk about Trail of Tears and things like that. And then there was intense religious indoctrination during that time too. Termination was kind of that, reorganization is the period in which the US government created a process where tribes could organize governmental structures that resemble the Western style. So like having a president and a vice president and councils like that. It kind of helped set up a means for the tribes to continue to get the resources that they need or have access to resources that they need and funding for programs to benefit Native people. That makes it sound nice, but really it was another way that the government was trying to gain more control over. Instead of, they were trying to, kind of get past treaties and hope treaties would go away and not meet those obligations. And so, this was one way that they said, all right, well, we'll work with you, but you have to do it on our terms instead of the terms we originally determined. The next period of within the government history was the termination. So this was a period during the mid-1900s, early 1900s even, that terminated tribes who were growing to be self-sufficient. So there were a number of tribes who were getting it figured out. They were developing economy. They were thriving within their culture and language. They had their own government systems separate from the US, and they were no longer dependent on the treaties, and they were figuring it out. And that felt like a threat to the government. So this was an effort for the US to extinguish the federal trust responsibilities established when the treaties were signed. So again, not a nice time. Even in Canada, there was a period of termination, and prime ministers and presidents throughout history have said, you know, if a tribe does not have its land base, its culture, or its language, it can no longer be considered a tribe, and so you're done. And I know there have been some presidents who have taken the recognition of sovereign nations away from them, and in Canada as well. And now, because of the resources tribes have been able to pull together, many of the tribes are getting their recognition, and they're getting their communities back. And then this last period, which led to tribes saying enough's enough, you're not terminating us, was the period of self-determination. And this is the current period that we're in with the federal tribal relations. It allows for space and agency for the tribes and tribal organizations to develop and provide programming for their own citizens, as well as have nation-to-nation consultation between tribes and the federal government, as well as the state. So we kind of have control over that. There we go. This is just a map of that whole treaty area. So treaties, the treaty period, you know, pretty much started when the Crown was here, when, you know, British colonies were starting to set up, and then once the U.S. had their revolutionary independence from the Crown, then we had the U.S. treaty era, which, you know, you can kind of see here some of those treaties. Definitely some of the ones that affected Michigan are here. There's a lot more than that, but these are the ones that affected Michigan especially. So I don't know if you need another minute to read that. Thumbs up if you're good. Okay. So these are just some current, like, early presidents that set early presidents after the treaty area was done, or the treaty era. If we take a step back, like from 1819, there was an act to civilize Indians adjacent to settlers. So, but the president of the time who set that act in place was basically just saying, you know, let's get them out of there. This is just a nuisance. We don't want to have to keep this obligation. It's just too much. We're trying to expand. You know, we're creating new states and things like that. So although the act was meant to civilize, which I think is funny because it's like civilization can go both ways. You know, we already had a civilization, but yet we had to, so it was more of assimilation, and that's how that act was kind of enforced. But the Marshall Trilogy established the judicial and federal relationship between the tribes and the government and local governments as well. And this was important because, you know, without some of these things in place, people could be shot, or, you know, their land holdings, you know, just taken over. There was just basic lawlessness. And there was a lot of different ways that people had tried to assimilate tribes, you know, one through alcoholism, through just, you know, martial law, really just, you know, shoot on sight. Who's gonna blame me for moving these people out of here when we want this land anyway? So the thing that protected and also harmed the tribes the most would be the treaties. You know, having these documents in place was really important. I will say, of all the treaties that were ever signed by the U.S., not a single one has ever been upheld the way that it was intended to be upheld. So it's a constant fight, and we need people to understand treaty rights and to, you know, keep watch over them. So these were just some other ones. 1822 was the act to abolish trade with the Indians. So again, these other Marshall Trilogy laws kind of helped establish some structure to make sure that people just weren't being completely run over. 1828 was the Treaty of Washington, which was a mass removal, especially of the Cherokee people, but that led to precedents of other people starting to be removed. The Cherokee, you know, during this particular, the Treaty of Washington, it was a mass removal of especially the Cherokee and people on the southwest or southeastern coasts and things like that. But one of the things that were put in the treaty, just so you can see some of these things that were put in there, all the heads of the household received a blanket, a rifle, and a kettle. That was their payment for leaving their land. So it was kind of, you know, we think of treaties as mutual agreements, but they're not always. Sometimes it's just like, you got to go, and we have the military force to back it up, and here's what you get in exchange. So you got something, you know. So the heads of households got that, whereas the rest of the, you know, that person's family would have got just a blanket, you know. So you have to move all these people with just little means. 1830 was the Indian Removal Act. So, you know, that was basically stating all must go. So with that, I want to show you another, I'm going to pause share and go back to another, go back to another quick video here, maybe. There we go. Where's it at? Oops, did I lose it? Oh, I did lose it. Okay, hold on a second. Let me see. Okay. Sorry, just a second. Well, does anybody have any questions while I'm finding this real quick? Okay. All right, so with this map that I'm going to pull up here in just a second. Just mute the sound here. I'll just show you kind of that treaty area, or the treaty era, what happened when the lands have ceded. Okay. Share screen. Okay. There we go. So you see the blue is all the ceded land. Okay. So you can kind of see the progression over a short period of history, how lands were ceded and taken from people. I mean, when the British colonies were first set up, you know, the agreement was just the 13 colonies, you know, just this space, that's it, you know, we're good. And then as the U.S. started to grow and expand itself, it was like, okay, everything along the East Coast. And then it was, you know, all right, well, we'll go this far to the Missouri area. And then it was nothing past the Mississippi for the longest time until the gold rush happened. And then it was all out. It was just, let's just start doing this removal because there's some resources here that we could really tap into. So, you know, and that's just a few generations. If you think 1800s, that's not that far, that's not that long ago. So share my screen. So I'm conscientious of the time. I know we only have 15 minutes, but I think understanding some of the history and where we're at is important to understand why sometimes we have this resistance and why people are hesitant and why we're still working on building those trusts with people. All right, do you guys see it? Did it come up?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So trust and responsibility. So every treaty that was signed is basically a trust agreement, and especially in Michigan, but most treaties are based around the protection of health, education, and land. So, you know, in Michigan, we have the tuition waiver, and that was one of the treaty rights that were preserved. We wanted to make sure that children could be educated and fairly educated, not just assimilated, but have the same education as others. Healthcare became the Indian Health Service, you know, because we were removed from our land where we had our medicines and we knew how to treat different illnesses and diseases. We had no longer had access to the plants and the trees in the ways that we normally provided healthcare. And so the government had to supplement that. And that was the development of the Indian Health Service. Land management, of course, is sustenance. You know, we hunt and fish, and some people are growing things. But as agriculture started to expand, then that land, you know, that access to the land was removed. So there's constantly these fights. And, you know, some of our own people, our own Native people, they feel that there's something off about things, but don't always know why. And a lot of it just comes from what's been passed down, that this has constantly been a fight and we need to watch out for these things. So, you know, we paid in advance for the things that we still have access today. So it's not what I hear people saying all the time. Why do they always get all this stuff? Why do Native people get this stuff? I should be Native, then I can have these benefits. Our ancestors, our relatives paid in advance. They look ahead 7 generations when they're doing this planning. Our governments have always worked that way, where you look ahead in your planning and look at the consequences or potential consequences and plan for that. You know, of course, when our US government was working during those times, they were just looking for a way to try and get access to the resource and worry about later on what happens. So tribal government structures, where we're at now.
Michelle, I'm sorry to interrupt, but for me, the screen is frozen again, so I didn't catch that transition, and I don't know if that's true for anyone else, but.
Yep.
Do you see the orange screen right now?
Nope, we're still on trust responsibility.
Are you? Why is it doing that? Bring your window to the front. Let's see. Oh, that's going backwards. All right, let me escape out of this again. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
All right, we'll just do it this way. Is that big enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Work. Yeah.
All right. So, you know, a lot of this is writing. I'll share the PowerPoint with you all afterwards, but the tribal government structures right now in the state of Michigan, even though we were all one nation as Anishinaabe people, we were all one nation. We had some shared governance and things like that. We are now all considered individual tribes. So 12 federally recognized tribes, each with their own sovereign government styles, and each one is different, and each is a different size. So like in the Bay Mills community, they have a tribal government structure that elects 5 people, but the general tribal council are the ones who make the final decisions for big decisions for the tribe. And the general tribal council is made up of everybody 18 and older. And in order to make big decisions like developing a new casino or entering into a new enterprise, they have to have the majority of the GTC, the General Tribal Council's approval. It's not the tribal chairman's decision, it is the tribal council's decision. Whereas in other tribes, you know, they don't have the title of tribal chairman, they might have the title of tribal president, and that depends on which treaty established them as a tribe. So Bay Mills is an older tribe. They were established in an 1832 treaty. 1836 was another one that they had entered into, whereas some of the Potawatomi tribes downstate were part of the Reorganization Act. I think GTB was an older tribe, and then they had their rights taken away at one time and then got them back during the Reorganization Act of 1984. So some of their structures are going to be a little bit different than the other tribes, and that's part of that reasoning. So, you know, to be able to address all tribal leaders the same, I understand can be kind of complex, but generally most of them nowadays will go by tribal chairman. There's a few that have preference, but just addressing them, you know, how do you prefer to be addressed? You know, is chairman okay, or do you prefer something else?
Yeah.
And we could go over individual tribes and have that conversation. For some of the tribes, it's a lot different. Our older structures before colonization, we would have had leaders. We would have had leaders, you know, assigned to different roles in the community. Somebody who looks over the health, somebody who looks over commerce, somebody who looks over whatever. And a lot of times it was the men and the women holding equal roles. In some of the tribes, the men do not make a final decision until the women okay it. And most of our tribes, we had to have 100% agreement on something before anybody could do anything. If one person disagreed with a decision you wanted to make, you continued to negotiate until everybody agreed on the final outcome. And nowadays we know we just have this fast-paced lifestyle that we don't do that anymore. So, and the clan that you had was very important. Each clan held a role in community, and so there were clan chiefs and clan mothers and things like that. So very different than what it used to be. So as you can see, you know, this is just kind of as our world started to change, so did the individual people. You know, we had the loss of culture through just a number of different efforts. And, you know, as I kind of briefly mentioned, some of the ways that we kind of lost our culture were through alcoholism, and that was forced on us. I mean, it was a tactic used by government officials to try and make sure that people signed away things that, you know, can't do anything after it's signed, because they knew that the Native folks would honor those kinds of things. So you can kind of see this is, you know, some of the things that are still people dealing with today. So there's that's a lot of the work that we do at ITC is trying to, you know, we work on environmental issues, education, health, and substance abuse. And those are, you know, some pretty much the priority areas for most of the tribes. You can kind of see a difference in the values here. And again, our lifestyle doesn't always allow us to be, you know, cooperative or be patient. And, you know, sometimes people are moving at such a pace that it's hard to really make good quality decisions because you're rushed and you're stressed. But you know, this is still a kind of one of those ingrained things that even if somebody doesn't feel like, somebody from the Native community doesn't feel like they grew up with the culture, you will still see some of these values in them because it's just been something that's been passed down. There's been, you know, we're working more on trusting academic systems, healthcare providers, authority figures. We had some discussion about using images, Native American images, and what that means, you know, so it's important to, you know, make sure that you do your homework on those kinds of things. And that just comes from misrepresentation. You know, you think about American Indian spirit cigarettes, you know, and they represent cigarettes. This is all natural. It's all good. The Native folks, tobacco is one of our main medicines. It's, you know, something that we still hold in high regard, but it's not a medicine when you're smoking it in a cigarette and, you know, recreational, and that's an abuse of that medicine. So, you know, using images has been, you know, a thing that just leads to a lot of misunderstanding of who people are, and then people make assumptions and really don't get to know the people. Some communication things. So, and you know, walking on words is something that you'll hear a lot when you're in a classroom with people or when you're in a lot of meetings. I mean, many of us are used to walking in two worlds. So we've learned when to speak up. We learned how to, you know, do things other ways. But when you're in the presence of elders and people who, you know, are very much ingrained in their culture, they are going to speak very slow, which, you know, on the other side of the coin, people who speak slow, we kind of perceive them as not being very intelligent, and that's not the truth. Most people are just observant and thinking, and you know, and there will be long pauses in people's responses. And again, even people who you think, well, they didn't grow up with the culture, but still that's been the way it is in their family, and it's one of those subconscious kind of cultural things that you'll see often. So I'll just let you read that. But yeah, just taking your time, you know, and trying not to make assumptions when you're having a conversation with somebody and you're like, okay, did they get it? Did they hear me? Or didn't they hear me? You know. Culture and language is very important to a lot of the people, but we do have a huge number of people, including people in our tribal leadership roles and our, you know, tribal government roles, who that, you know, the culture and the language have not been part of how they grew up. And so, you know, there's different levels of comfort with that. And some people who, you know, that's their passion, they want to make sure that they honor that. And others who, you know, in their family, that was such a terrifying thing or a traumatic thing that they just, I'm going to do it without that. And so we just respect everybody. But often, you know, I always try to address even people who I know are non, you know, don't follow the culture or you know, I'm not sure. I still will use the simple ani miigwech, you know, the simple language greetings when I can. And people appreciate that. Nobody's ever offended by that. And we could go into a language lesson and I could give you the literal translation for those words. And even if you don't understand what those mean, the heart is in those words. There's a lot of spirit. There's a lot of spirit put into those words. So, so the traditional teachings that are in here, I gave everybody that link. I know Hans sent it out to everyone. So at the bottom of that page, if you hadn't had time to look at this is the Anishinaabe Toronto Health website, or the Health Toronto website in Canada. And they did a series of brochures is what they look like. And they're on different parts of the culture. So there's clan systems, how to approach a native leader or a healer, all kinds of things, even right down to, you know, some of the medicinal ways, the 4 sacred medicines, things like that. So that'll give you a nice little brief overview of some of the cultural things that you may see or hear people talking about. If you have more questions about those, I'm happy to answer those. And then the other link that I gave you was to the Indian Health Service, and that was the cultural competency card. And that's also another brief course. And that one is more generalized to Native folks all across the country. Whereas this one here for the Toronto Health, that one is specific to Anishinaabe people and somewhat Iroquois. And some tribal folks from Michigan did work on those things as well. So, you know, some of our own people, and we use them all the time in like our health centers and things like that to help with people. So I think when we think about the history and the level of distrust that people have, when you're working with Native folks, keep in mind trauma-informed practices. People are, and just like anybody who's been through trauma, and that's not just Native folks, but, you know, if you're gonna make any type of an assumption about a people, about any person, always think about it as, I don't know what this person has been through, and I'm not going to judge their reaction. Don't take it personally. You know, that's just good practice with anybody anywhere. But just be a good role model and be open, be genuine and honest. If you're coming at somebody in an honest way, you're sincere in what you're trying, the work that you're trying to do and the approach and the resolve that you have, that person may or may not react very well to you. And if they don't, just continue to be respectful, you know, be an open listener, avoid judgment, avoid making assumptions. And it's a good practice no matter what culture you're from or who you're talking to. You know, focus on the positive communication and the strength-based approaches, you know, not what's wrong, but what can we do right? How can we make things better? And be open. Some things may make sense, some things might not. So I know we're running close to time, so I kind of briefed through everything. But this is another video series. There's only 3 listed here, but you can kind of see the YouTube link. But if you type in Open Door Native American series, I think there's 5 of these now. They were all done, I'm trying to think when they were done. but a lot of the Michigan tribal folks had worked on some of these too. As a matter of fact, this one right here, she's an elder from up north there. I think she's from Little Traverse Bay Band. But different people have worked on these too. So these will give you a little bit more about the history and people and where we're at. And as far as additional reads, these are some that I have used in the classroom. These are ones that I shared with Christina and Jim Lively. Yep.
I'm still reading it.
Yep.
Great.
So the first two are more like textbooks, and they are ones, you know, both the first two actually I've used at all different levels. Well, mostly middle school and college level, I've used The Rights of Conquest and People of the Three Fires. The Mishomis book is one I cited if you want to know a little bit about our migration story, our clan system, some of our basic culture. That's in that book, and that was written by Eddie Benton Benet. He is a Madawan leader. He's way up there. He's a first language, you know, he speaks Anishinaabe as a first language. He's a spiritual leader. He's even done some things on PBS. He's done a couple of cultural videos you could find. He's phenomenal. The Good Path by Thomas Peacock is also good. I've used that as a textbook. Actually, Mishomis book too. The Good Path, I've used that for elementary and middle school and kind of adapted some things. Thomas Peacock has some others too. Rethinking Michigan Indian History, Holding Our World Together, and American Indian Facts. Those are all some other ones that are really, you know, just kind of simple things if you want to get more into the structure and the government and the history and those type of relations. Those are good. Holding Our World Together is more of a narrative type story, and it really talks about the Nishnabe Trail of Tears. So everybody knows about, you know, Sand Creek with the Cherokee being removed, and you have that image, but there was also one after that when the government was trying to move the Anishinaabe people from Michigan. And that one actually is called the Sandy Lake Massacre. And there were as many people who were killed on that Trail of Tears as there were the Cherokee, but it's one that is a lot less known. So that will give you some of that history. So I know we're running out of time, and I apologize. I wanted to have more time for questions, but does anybody have questions or anything you want to go back to, something you want me to elaborate on later, whatever? There's so much here. This was like, it's really hard to do all of that in 1 hour, but I think we got the crash course in.
Oh.
Go ahead, Mary, just popcorn in.
Oh, okay. I am just almost overwhelmed by the difference in the beginnings of culture. Yours are old cultural ways, and ours began as Umir Haq, who John Bersini keeps me reading, suggests that, you know, we were really taught to be dominant. We were taught to colonialize, to take, and that we really haven't yet come to terms with the consequences of that being the underlying culture here in the United States. And so as I was reading, just the way children are named and ceremonies for this individual that they are, and that they're part of a clan, and just this beautiful, beautiful cultural connectedness. And I realized that in our culture, we go for competitiveness. Mm-hmm. We don't go for cooperation and collaboration easily. Yeah. And so it's really moving to me that we have so much to learn from the original people here.
Yeah. I don't want to say I have a hard time talking about race, but I feel like the foundation that I was fortunate to have helps me understand that, you know, there is something that gave us all life, a purpose, and a meaning. And there are some cultures of people who really struggle with finding what that is, and there's different rites of passage that we go through. And I feel like in the United States, because of how the US's history itself, it was like all of these different cultures coming together. But the foundation of it was about colonialism and taking over. I mean, that was during a period of the British Empire where the sun never sets on the British Empire. And we, you know, and it was basically true. I mean, they had colonies all over the world at that time. And, but if you go back into every single culture on the face of the earth, they all had some type of earth culture at one time. And it was either, you know, through whatever means it had been shifted, you know, either, you know, conquering, genocide, whatever. But it's all still within us because we all have that same spark of life in all of us. It's the same thing. So when we let go of preconceived ideas, when we understand history as a tool for building on our wisdom and don't stay stuck there, we are not our history. We are who we are in this present time. It makes it a little bit easier to talk about these things and move past them, you know, and I think that's where our conversation needs to go. So when I was planning for this presentation, I'm like, okay, I know what people really want to see, but is that what we need to be talking about right now? You know, if we're talking about building race relations, you know, we need to be open. We need to be able to figure out how to listen and how to be observant in different ways and not hold on to our judgments, our, you know, biases, and just think about what's at the center of all of us, you know, what's at our spirit and who we are as individuals, not the work we do, not, you know, our likes and dislikes, but who we are as human beings, as creatures, as part of nature, you know, and start to move with that more. And it feels so wild and out there and maybe even hippie-ish, but it's, you know, I think when you get to the deep culture of anywhere, any culture around the world, that is going to be the basis of humanity. So that was kind of big, sorry.
Michelle, I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that you're such a phenomenal teacher, and I really enjoyed this presentation, and I look forward to soaking on all of the information you brought to us and taking another look at the resources you shared at us. So thank you.
And thanks, Casey. Congratulations on your new position. I'm so glad we still get to work together. Yay.
Yeah. Michelle, I'll just jump in here. This is Jim. I want to say thank you so much. And I feel like we did you a disservice by only giving you an hour.
Yeah.
You know, I think we need a year. Yeah. But I, you know, you really started a conversation that I know we need to continue ourselves. But I'd also really like to just stay connected with you for some guidance and what we can do next. Hans texted me and said, you know, what are our next steps? And they're not yet, I don't think, entirely clear, but I think what's clear to me is we have a lot more learning and listening and understanding that I want to do, and I'd like to do more of it with this group. So
yeah,
I'd like to stay connected with you on what we can do next.
Absolutely. That would be an honor. I mean, and I don't know it all and I can't speak for all, but, you know, we definitely have some tools we've been able to maintain within our culture that could be shared with everybody, you know, and every culture has something like that, you know, so exploring what we have to help us unite or be one, I think is important.
Thank you.
I have an idea. I think we're all just full of gratitude to Michelle. How about we all unmute and just say thanks all at once?
Yeah.
Little red button. 1, 2, 3. Thanks a lot, Michelle.
Wonderful. So much.
That's really cool. Everybody kind of breathe when you do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we will we'll stay in touch and we'll do something more in the future.
Sounds great.
Keep people posted. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
Have a great
everybody.
day, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
All right.